Thank you all for joining us today for the 5 Guiding Principles, How to Design Impactful Experiences and Services Using Data Science webinar. I'm Jenny Lassie, the Digital Marketing Strategist for Infinity Direct and your moderator for today's webinar. A few housekeeping notes before we begin today's presentation. All attendee audio will be muted during the entire presentation. Please see either the 24-hour or 1 hour before emails you received and download the workbook if you haven't already. If you registered within the last hour, I will post a link in the chat pod that you can download. Please enter all questions into the GoToMeeting chat pod as there will be a short Q&A session following the presentation. If we're not able to get to all questions, we will follow up with you directly following today's presentation. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email following today's presentation with a link to a survey. We appreciate your time in filling out the short survey to help us be even better presenters in the future. And there will be a raffle on today's webinar for live attendees, and the winner will be chosen immediately after the webinar has ended and will receive a notification shortly after. On that note, I would like to welcome today's presentation team, Sean Harding from Infinity Direct, along with April Seifert and Justin Royer from Sprocket CX. Sean, would you like to please start us off?
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. This is Sean Harding from Infinity Direct, Executive Vice President, and I want to thank you for joining us today. As we've all seen and are aware, direct marketing is evolving at a more rapid pace today, and you need to have a strategic partner that can bring more innovative ideas to the table in a more rapid and agile way. That's why we are proud to say that our partnership with Sprocket CX grew from a mutual belief that having more great minds at the table yields better results. And in this webinar, the Sprocketeers will introduce you to 5 important principles that will help you reframe the way you think about data science for creating better customer experiences. With that said, I would like to introduce you to April and Justin.
Hey everyone, this is Justin Royer speaking. I'm a co-founder of Sprocket CX and also the experience design practice here at Sprocket. And first things first, it wouldn't be a fun webinar party if we didn't jump right into the free beer raffle that Jenny mentioned. So if you're interested in that, the instructions are right here. You simply text beer to 55678 and you'll be entered to win for a custom curated brew basket for some good Minnesota brews. We'll give you another shot at that toward the end of the webinar in case you forget, but I'll leave it up here for another second in case you're looking for your phone. But text beer to 55678 to be entered. And again, we'll draw that immediately after the webinar and you'll be notified if you win. So good luck to that. And again, thanks everyone for joining. Again, my name is Justin. And April and I are extremely excited to run you through these 5 principles of how we think about using data science to make great experiences. And as a bit of intro, in terms of who Sprocket is, well, we like to call ourselves a data-loving customer experience strategy firm. We combine things that you don't normally see combined, and that namely is data science, experience design, and economics, or like we say, we use analytics and imagination to help our clients do 3 main things. The first is to better understand their customers, and we do that via creating personas and segmentation and customer journey maps, things like that to help you better understand customers. We also help you capture more value from existing customers with retention strategy, communication planning, and loyalty program strategy. And then finally, we help our clients innovate and grow in completely new ways from the insight that we start with. So before we get into the 5 principles that April and I will go through, we wanted to do just a little bit of grounding, and we wanted to start with data science because we know that there are a lot of definitions for data science. Most are extremely technical and above people's heads. We wanted to share our pragmatic definition of data science, and that simply is it right here. It's the art of using data to drive decisions, to inform and power processes, and to enable businesses to grow and move forward intelligently. We use the term science and hold that in very high regard, and that science is more than just analysis. Science seeks to learn something and to apply that to future better change. And that's how we see data science. And we also use data science in ways that grows business and moves business forward. So we see it a little bit differently than those that you might have seen out there as well. We also, again, we put data science and customer experience design together because they really create great value for our clients, but also honestly, the time is now. I mean, think back to, back in the 80s, if you will, in the dawn of the computer age. At that point, you could say, hey, I'm not really a computer person and still have a job. Well, fast forward a couple of decades, you can no longer really say that you're not a computer person. It's part and parcel with everything we do. Data is becoming that way too. It's the air that we breathe. It's ultimately the fabric of the way business works. And to us, it's all about how you use that data in order to create great experiences that drive economic value. And that's what we're going to step into here. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, April, for a little bit, and we're going to get to work.
All right, thanks, Justin. As Justin mentioned, my name is April Seifert, and I lead our data science practice at Sprocket CX. And we are so thrilled that you all joined us today for our webinar. Now, this webinar is going to function a bit like a hands-on tutorial. So our intention today is to walk you through our unique mixed method approach toward tackling some of the more challenging puzzles that our clients bring to us. And today's approach is focused on customer experience, but we actually use a really similar mixed method approach in all of the work that we do. So we really hope you learn a lot from that today. Now, let's do a quick jargon check. Now, as a quick heads up, Justin mentioned it before, we're melding two worlds that don't very often commingle. So designers and data scientists don't typically hang out together. So it's not often that you're going to hear jargon from these two worlds all in the same presentation. So as we move forward through the webinar, we're going to do our best to provide context about each of these more jargony words, but expect to see some things that you might be familiar with depending upon your background, and some things that might be new and a bit out there for you. So with that bit of a disclaimer, let's dig into these 5 principles. So in this webinar, we're going to be going through 5 different principles for using data science for customer experience design. So beginning with humans and their needs, context is critical, make the experience more personal, easy, and enjoyable, don't leave customer value on the table, and you can't analyze your way into the future. And as we move through these 5 principles, you'll see how we incorporate data science in each step and how the findings of each step build on those of previous steps, and more importantly, how they come together to drive business value. And as we move through each one, what we're going to ask is for some input from you. We really want you to participate in today's webinar because let's face it, it's much more fun to participate than to quietly sit at your desk. So you might as well play along. And as Jenny mentioned, if you've had the chance to download the workbook that accompanies the webinar, you're really going to find it useful. If not, we've provided some of the visuals within the presentation itself, so you won't be completely lost. You might be a little lost, but not completely lost. So regardless, if you have that workbook in front of you now, it's definitely time to get that out. And if you don't have it, definitely download it. I might be biased, but I think there's some really good stuff in there. So let's get to know our fictitious brewery called Lakeboard Brewery. Lakeboard Brewery is a fictitious company that we're going to be using throughout today's webinar to illustrate in hopefully a clear way about how we use data science in a number of different ways to take a company from the standpoint of understanding their customers all the way through testing their way into driving additional value. So we're going to start where we always start at Sprocket, and we'll start with humans, their needs, and what makes them tick. So principle 1 is begin with humans and their needs. To do this at Sprocket, we combine traditional qualitative research methods with quantitative data science methods like unsupervised machine learning and things like that that you might have heard from other definitions of data science, as Justin went through ours before. And our whole goal here is to identify natural groups of customers who each have distinct needs. And that's a really critical distinction between the way that we focus on personas and the way that others might focus. Some groups who use purely a data science approach may focus on things like economic value and only be able to uncover groups of personas who are either very valuable or less valuable to a company. We focus much more on what are those customers' needs, because we know from research in data science and our prior experience that when we can meet customers' needs, that's really when we drive value. So as we dig into this principle, let's take a peek at some data with the goal of using those pieces of data to fill in the blank persona sheet that's in your workbook. So today, we're actually going to be describing persona B. And for those of you who don't have the workbook in front of you, we're looking at the middle bar in most of these charts that are on your screen, just in case it's a little bit small. And our goal here is to sort of synthesize everything that we're seeing and fill in that blank persona chart. So this is the point where I'm going to ask all of you to use your chat feature within the webinar and tell me just at the outset, as you're looking at this, is there anything that you notice about persona B? Again, that is the middle bar in these charts. And you can literally just throw it out there, anything you're seeing, and Jenny will be moderating that chat. So I'll give you just a couple of seconds to throw your answers in the chat. Just a couple of things to look at here too, as you piece through each of these different charts. Something to look at, bottom left. This stuck out to me as I was looking at the results of this. You know, is this a person who comes for business or do they come for personal reasons? Is this a person who has kids? Take a peek at some of those really specific things and start to synthesize that and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what you think this might make this person tick.
There is a response in the chat pod. They are hipsters with no kids.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So you're hitting on something amazing right with that, is that this person, you're correct, they do not tend to visit Lakeboard with kids.
There's also all work, no kids, larger groups.
Beautiful. So no kids. This person is coming for business reasons, and they come with a larger group.
Okay, and another response, customer B looks like a business person who is looking to frequent for happy hours.
It's as though we paid you. Pass that person a beer, and let's actually flip to the next page, because let's look at what we put together when we were synthesizing all of these data. And what you might immediately notice here as we go through this slide is that, you know, we're actually going beyond what we're going to see in the data. And that's why I loved what that last response was. What we find is that the data that we see, that we pull from our clients and that we collect from customers gets us about 80% of the way there. And then we need to go that additional 20% to start to put a persona together. So the persona that we developed is this person we're calling Deal Making Dana. You hit it spot on the head. We see this person as a business person who is coming to Lakeboard for happy hours, likely to do business. So if we start at the top left and we kind of work our way around this slide, this is a male who is mid-30s to mid-50s, about 6 occasions annually. Kids are not something they're looking for, but they do want it to be a trendy place. Environment's important, food is important, a beer selection is important. And this person is really coming to Lakeboard to get business done. And so jobs to be done, build relationships and advance business deals during the course of a work week. So these persona charts, and just to tie in some of the partnership that Sean talked about with Infinity Direct, when we develop a persona like this, it's extremely useful for customer experience work. But in a partnership like ours with Infinity Direct, it's also really useful when we talk about communication campaigns. You can speak much more clearly directly to a person like Dana if you know the information about them, like the information that we're showing on this slide. So it makes it a much more relevant message when we can pull out that type of information on a customer. All right, I'm going to pass it back over to Justin, and he'll go through a couple more principles.
All right, let's move on to principle number 2. Now that we've got an introduction to who Dana is, principle number 2 is called context is critical. And again, our first step is always to understand the humans that we seek to serve. That was principle 1. Now we want to know more about them. We want to know the surround sound of how they engage with us, and what their experience is like today. So in your packet, if you downloaded that, you'll see that you've got an example journey map in there. A journey map is a great story of the context of literally of a consumer's journey, a pre, during, and post transaction, perhaps, a way that to describe a service being performed. It's a great tool that we often use. We start often in Sprocket land understanding customer journeys through qualitative insight. So again, like April described, qualitative measures like interviewing, ethnography, ride-alongs, observations of customers. We use this to create initial versions of journey maps, but we use data science in a way to help quantify certain pieces of the journey as well. We use quantified surveys. Many of you out there might be quantifying moments within your customer's experience today in various ways. Perhaps you've got a customer experience analytics tool that you're using for this, or you're using other tools. You might be using Net Promoter Score, etc. We use all of those as well to quantify a customer's journey. But what we want to focus on today and introduce you to is the power of a subset of machine learning, which is called natural language processing, that we use. And again, we're going to show you some examples here on screen. You also have this in your packet, but we're going to talk about how we think about principle number 2 of context using natural language processing. So on the screen now, you've got a couple of word clouds. And word clouds are fun because they're great visualizations of data. And we like those at Sprocket as well. But what you're seeing here is with Lakeboard, we grab their online reviews, either through a review site or potentially directly off of Lakeboard's website, to take and ingest all that unstructured data. Online reviews are unstructured because that you know, as a customer, you can type in anything you want. The data doesn't follow a predefined structure. And we analyze positive and negative reviews, and that's what you see here in the word cloud. So take a look on the left. With positive reviews, you see things like great beer, great food, and the place is good. So people like the environment, they like the food and the beer. That's all good. You also see some other things in there, like perhaps try the gnocchi. For any gnocchi fans out there, looks like they might have something good. Now look on the right-hand side with negative reviews. In this case, and we see this often with a lot of our clients, and then sometimes you see the same words because someone's experience can be very different than someone else's. Perhaps the beer and the food wasn't that great for those that had negative reviews. You know, perhaps they came on a bad night and the service wasn't great. In this case, we also see a lot of people saying that the place is loud. This just gives us a good visual understanding and a quick hits of what's going on and getting some insight that will help us quantify and round out the context of the consumer's experience. Now, word clouds are nice, and we do like them, and we do use them, but we go much deeper to get better contextual insight here. And we look particularly for words that co-locate together, words that you see together to form phrases that you wouldn't expect randomly. So, for example, in the upper left with positive reviews, you see phrases like great beer and wide selection and cool venue and private room and good appetizers. Those phrases pop up. On the negative side, in the upper right, you see things like loud music, small portions, happy hour, and brown guacamole. Who wants brown guacamole? No one, that's who. And so now we've got some issues that we can hone in on. But wait, there's more. Not only are we looking for these key phrases, but we're specifically looking for things people say after certain words. You know, back in the day, the only way to get this type of insight was to do really great qualitative work in one-on-one interviews and ethnography to figure out what people really want and what they like. And while we do that at Sprocket, we also use natural language processing of reviews like this to understand en masse what people are looking for. So what people said after the word wanted, they wanted to be able to sit down, they wanted to call ahead, bigger plates, beer flights, discount codes, got a bunch of cheapskates out there. And then on the lower right, what did customers like? So we're specifically looking again for phrases that pop out after people said the word liked. They like the drink Shandy Beach, which why wouldn't you like that drink? It sounds delightful. Limited releases, live music, outdoor space. So again, they're liking the environment that's being created. All of this to say that natural language processing is a great way to get insight for the context of your customer's experience. And it's never been more approachable from a technology standpoint than it is today. So that was principle number 2, which again was getting context. Principle 1, going back again, was understanding what humans need. Now we're going to fast forward to principle 3. And I'm going to pause here and slow down just a little bit so that we can reflect on the first 2 principles. So principle 1 was understanding humans and their needs, and principle 2 was understanding context. Both of those are highly analytic in nature. We're trying to describe what reality is today. Principle 3 is materially different. Principle 3 is make the experience more personal, easy, and enjoyable. This is the other side of the design coin where we're actually starting to create or envision the future. And this is where, again, we see this great mesh of data science bringing the analytic power, and design, customer experience design, bringing the innovation and vision for what a future experience can be. So now we're going to show you how we do this at Sprocket, and give you a couple of tips along the way. In your packet, again, you'll find several things. If you're following along at home, you'll see things in there like the journey map and persona that we talked about. You'll see a page on natural language processing. I'm going to bring all of these things together in principle 3 to show you how we do it. Now, principle 1 and 2 were all about analysis and understanding the current reality today. And what we do with that at Sprocket is we turn that into observations. And observations come from a lot of different sources. It might be from the natural language processing that we just talked about. Perhaps it was from the results of our journey mapping. We might have found some more or additional insight from the persona development that we did. But we're looking for clumps of observations that go together. And so this example that you're looking at, let's take a look at the left-hand side of the page. So observations, let's talk about what we've learned about Dana. So we know that Dana likes getting a private room for hosting events or for hosting clients. We saw that through our journey map and our online reviews. We also see that Dana often has to bring his own meeting supplies because they're not available in the private rooms. We saw that through the context that we gleaned when we did customer journey mapping research. And then a third observation is the beer selection at Lakeboard is great, but it can be intimidating to new customers. We saw that from online reviews, which you might remember from a page or 2 ago, and we saw that from the journey map research as well. Now, having observations is great, but in order to turn the corner into something that's actionable creatively, we need to turn that into an insight. And a lot of times people get confused around the difference between observations and insights. And I'll tell you the secret here, folks, is that an insight always is a statement that seeks to explain causality. There's always the word because in a good insight. So as an example, highlighted in yellow, you see an insight that we're creating from these observations, which is business-focused customers like Dana. You nailed Dana in terms of he or she is in it for business. They like Lakeboard, but have to put forth extra effort to make it a successful meeting because of the lack of meeting services. So note that Dana likes Lakeboard. We saw that in our observations, but has to put forth extra effort, has to do extra things to make it the environment and the outcome that he or she desires, because he or she is using this for business purposes. Lakeboard isn't really set up to be a convention center, right? But they're set up to be a really great brewery. However, Dana's really looking for Lakeboard to fit that need that he or she has. So again, look for the word because in an insight statement to make it meaningful, and a helpful way then to create what is really important if you're looking to drive greater creativity from your teams. You need to create a trigger question. So once you have observations that turn into an insight, you need to create a trigger question that will give you some good constraints to focus your attention. So many times it's hard to believe that your team can be creative because you're just not asking the right questions. And that's why we love to create trigger questions that start with the phrase, how might we? In this case, here's the question for you for Lakeboard, which is, how might we leverage existing Lakeboard assets to create new services that cater more to business customers? So again, we're noting that Lakeboard has really great assets. People love the environment, the food is great, all that jazz. How can we leverage those things to create new services that cater more to business customers? Because we know that folks like Dana are using Lakeboard within the context of trying to grow their business. So this question really is critical, and questions like it are critical if you want to, again, get your team to think creatively and to start to turn the corner from just analyzing the current state to start building the future. So once you have that question, now this is the point where I think a lot of people get really excited, because this is when you get to start the creative juices really flowing. How can we actually change our current state and bring on the future? Well, we came up with a couple of different ways, and you can do this a lot of different ways. Brainstorming, tactics like brain writing, which by the way are fantastic if you have some introverts in your group. There are other tactics like pass the post-it. There are other innovation games you can play. There are a lot of ways to get creative. But imagine that these are 3 simple post-its that came out as ideas answering the question that we have on the board here. So if we're looking for ways to leverage existing Lakeboard assets to create new services that cater to business customers, well, we could do these 3 things. We could allow Dana to book a private room online instead of having to call, because that's a pain point. We could provide common meeting essentials like whiteboards and notepads and Sharpies as add-on rentals. So it could be a revenue stream for Lakeboard, and it could be a nice convenience for Dana. And things like automated emails inviting Dana's team to the meeting and providing helpful first-time tips like that, like what awesome beers and non-alcoholic drinks await them. You can better set expectations. And again, like April said earlier, this is also an intersection point where we like to play with Infinity Direct, because once we have an understanding of the journey map and we have these ideas that are seeking to create value and solve problems, we can use that to create strategically targeted and purposeful communication plans and tactics with Infinity Direct. All right, so that was principle 2 and 3. I'm going to turn it back over to April, and we're going to go forward with principle 4.
Awesome. Okay, so before we dive into principle 4, there's one point that I want to make absolutely crystal clear here. And let's fire up the chat one more time to drive this point home. If we're being honest, how many of you who are on the webinar have either thought, or maybe you've said this, or maybe you've heard people in your company say, we just don't have the data we need, or we don't have the access to the data that we need, or we don't have the integration of the data that we need to make decisions or to drive our business forward? If you've thought that or heard that, or someone in your company has said that to you, type yes in your chat bot. I just want to see if this is an experience that you guys have had.
There's a yes and a smiley face emoticon.
And I asked this, oh, go ahead.
There's also another, we don't have the data analyst to look at the data.
Interesting. Interesting. So I bring this up because it's a common thing that I have heard throughout my career in data science. And I don't know the experience that all of you have had within your individual companies, but one thing that can cause people to feel that way is if you're relying solely on the data to be the be all, and this is the data scientist saying this, so I'm a bit, denigrating my field a little bit, but if you're relying solely on the data to tell you the end all be all answer, or you're not integrating, and by that I mean mentally, just in the terms of the synthesis that Justin just walked you through, data from disparate places, you don't even need a data warehouse in order to do that. It can be a mental exercise like Justin walked you through. Those integration pieces can really allow your data to work harder for you versus if you just look at one chart and expect that chart to answer all of your questions. So one of the reasons why we were really excited about this webinar and excited about lifting the curtain and showing you the method that we use to run through these 5 principles, it's because it shows really nicely, I believe, how each piece of data starts to build on the other one, and you craft a story as you go and learn more and more. But no one piece of data is the end all be all of the answer that we're getting to. And you'll see even more of that in principles 4 and 5 as we start to move into a much more deep dive into more transactional data. So a lot of you probably have access to transactional data about your customers. What is their basket size? How many visits have they had? What is their average spend in a given month, and a number of other transactional data pieces like that. Now, it's important to understand, for sure who our customers are and what their motivations are and what their journey is. But when we start to connect the dots, either through data integration or through the exercise similar to what Justin, walked you through on the last slide, as we start to connect the dots, between personas, their needs, and what their transactional data look like, that's when things get really, really interesting, because we can be very targeted about driving additional value from our existing customers. So we're going to have you grab your packet again, or we'll show you some visuals on the next slide, but grab your packet and look at some of the transactional data that we've provided. And we're going to form another how might we question, but specifically targeted at how we're going to grow value for Lakeboard with their existing customer, Dana. So let's take a peek at some data really quick. All right. One more time for you guys to interact with me here. I'm making you read some more data. As you're looking at this, focus on Dana. Dana's in blue for those of you who aren't able to read that if you're on screen and it's kind of small. Tell me what you're noticing if you synthesize this entire page together. What are you noticing about Dana? From Dana's behaviors. I'll give you a clue. Start on the left side and synthesize just the two pie charts. All right, what I noticed when I looked at this is that top left, Dana's about 30% of our customers at Lakeboard. Bottom left, Dana's only driving 16% of visits. So Dana's behavior is not proportional to the proportion of our customers that Dana makes up. So Dana's not visiting us as often as other customers do. And that led me to start looking at data like what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. What do you guys notice about that blue line in Dana's behavior? So this is his pattern of visits month over month throughout the year. What do you guys notice about his behavior?
He visits in the summer.
He does. He visits in the summer, and he takes a pretty steep dive when fall comes. He has a little bit of an uptick around the holidays, and then a really sharp decline in the winter months when things start to get cold. So here in this type of data, you start to see some opportunities, because Dana, if you compare Dana to that purple line, which is all customers, Dana is actually under visiting or underperforming, or we're not getting as much value out of Dana as we are our typical customers in the fall and certainly in the winter. So that presents an opportunity for us. So if we flip to the next slide, we'll start to look at how we can form a how might we question about Dana's visit pattern. So in this case, how might we fill in Dana's valleys in his seasonality in a business like ours that is a seasonal business? How can we drive additional visits from Dana in the times when he isn't as likely to visit us? And the neat thing about this principle is that it rolls really nicely into the next principle, which is principle 5. So principle 5 hits on a point that I made a little bit earlier about how you can't analyze your way into the future. As much as I adore data, as much as I truly believe that data helps us make more informed decisions and is an extremely powerful tool for every company to have, it is not the be all end all. Data can take you so far, and at that point, you really do need to start using it, making some changes, and starting to see what works. Now, that can actually be really scary for a business because it can be risky. If you're going to put a new product out into the world, if you go through the time and effort to develop an entire new product before you put it out there and you aren't sure whether that product is going to perform, you can be taking a really big risk, and that can be really difficult for a lot of the clients that we work with. So what we like to do is use something that we call a test and learn card, and we have a test and learn card in the packet that you downloaded. And this is a great way, it's a framework for you to think about how to run small experiments. These experiments take the data that we've been working with throughout all of the 4 prior principles. It takes all those data and put them together with some creativity to say, how can we throw a little experiment out there to help us determine what our next steps might be? So using the how might we question that we developed in Principle 4, we've filled out a test and learn card for you. So these experiments, test your assumptions. They test your next steps, which are data based on data, but we want to see how they perform in the real world. And the only way to do that is to take them into the real world. The neat thing about this as well, many of you have likely worked in a company where it can be difficult to take a risk because you're afraid of being wrong. You might make a mistake and something might not turn out as well as you'd hoped it would. Again, these test and learn cards and these small experiments mitigate that because they really, really reduce the risk of trying something new, and you get a lot more information about how to move forward. So in the case of Dana's how might we question, how might we fill in Dana's valleys in a seasonal business, we want to see if we can promote rewards for off-pattern behaviors. So in this case, we know that Dana isn't likely to come. This is data that you had in your packet, but we want to create new occasions for Dana in the summer and on the weekends. And we also want to drive behavior. This could be something that we did to drive behavior in those seasons when Dana isn't as likely to visit. So again, in the winter months, we could use the same thing. So we could target Dana within our CRM and offer a free personalized growler if he has 3 visits. So maybe comes in for 3 happy hours during a time when he's less likely to come in. And this could be something as simple as a direct mail piece or an email. So we're not talking about a really high risk test. This walks you through a little bit of a framework about, how we're actually going to execute, who's going to be in charge. And then more importantly, it talks about how we're going to measure whether we think this experiment was successful. So we're actually going to look for a change in those Dana's behaviors as a result of the email or the direct mail piece that we sent out. And then we're going to say, here's how we know that we're right. Here's how we know that new email or that promotion actually drove new behaviors for Dana. So, we're actually seeing that Dana's behavior was an uptick compared to how it was last year at the same time. This can be, like I mentioned, a really nice low risk way for us to test new behaviors. And then if we see something like this working well, we can roll it out to the rest of our customers who might match that pattern. And this is another place for us to call out the partnership that we have with Infinity Direct, because Infinity Direct is a great company to be able to execute not only on some of these tests, they're extremely nimble and able to execute on some of these smaller tests to see if these promotions actually are driving behavior. But when we find a test that's actually doing well and actually driving behavior for our bottom line, we can hit the go button and they can actually roll that out to your larger customer base and put that into production with the rest of your communications campaigns. So it's a really neat way for us to partner on the CX and data science side with a nimble partner like Infinity Direct to start to roll some of these things out. All right, so let's review what we went through today. 5 principles. This is extremely meaty. I know we went through a lot in 40 minutes, but To review the 5 principles really quickly, we began with humans and their needs. We want to know what makes people tick, who they are, and how we might serve them better. We took into consideration the context that those customers are operating within. Then we turn the corner to start to think about the future, about how we can make their experience more personal, easy, and enjoyable. We focused on our existing customers to figure out how we can drive value from those existing customers rather than constantly going out to find new customers. And we talked about ways that we can mitigate some of the risk in making changes within our companies, so that we can start to use the data and use the creativity that we've developed throughout this process to start to push our company in a new direction into the future. So I really hope, as we've gone through these 5 principles, you saw how, number one, we use data science and some of these mixed methods to help inform the questions and the answers that we're driving for our clients, but also, as we move through these 5 principles, how they build on one another. And then finally, back to our definition of data science, how it drives value for our customers. So before we close out today, let's talk about the real reason why you joined us today. You joined us for beer, we know that. And so friends, it is officially last call for alcohol. So if you have not yet entered our beer raffle, this is the time to do it. We want you to text beer to 55678 for your chance to win a custom curated Minnesota brew basket. And Jenny will give us a couple of details again, just to remind you about how that winner will be drawn and when they will be notified. But before I close out, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. It has been really, really fun sharing this with you guys.
Thank you very much, April. Everybody, this is our contact information. So if you have any questions at all or think of something after today's webinar, do feel free to reach out. And the winner of today's raffle will be chosen after this webinar is done, and you will be notified from our text message platform that you are the winner, and we will reach out personally and get your information so we can get you that custom crafted Minnesota beer basket. And have, if there's any questions at all, you can certainly feel free to enter them into the chat pod now. And if we have time to answer all of them, great. If we just have time for a couple, we can certainly do that now too. So there's just one question that, or not really question, but maybe just some clarification in terminology. But for natural language processing, April, can you give me some examples of how that type of data is collected?
Yeah, definitely. So Justin mentioned it a little bit, but I guarantee all of you have been folks who have added data to the pool that is used for natural language processing. Anytime you have left a review on Google for a business, left a review on Amazon for a business, or left a review on even a business's website, you are generating data for natural language processing. Another way that this methodology can be used, and something that I've seen drive a lot of value for our clients, is many of you have probably conducted surveys where you ask some closed questions, which one of these is, most favorable to you, or rate this on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 7. But that only gets you so far. You only get the answers to the questions that you're asking. Typically, we want to go further than that, and we want to ask an open-ended question. Well, when we do that, then we're left with all this unstructured data, and someone is left with the awful job of combing through all of those responses and trying to sum them up for whoever it is who commissioned the survey. That is not something that you need to do anymore. So I, for one, welcome our machine overlords. And this is a time to call in the machines and have the machines comb through all of that unstructured data for you to generate some of the artifacts that Justin showed you earlier: word clouds, bigrams, words and phrases that follow things like liked. We can also, interestingly and super fun, we can actually spy on some of your competitors. So in the same way that your customers are leaving digital exhaust on the internet, so are your competitors' customers. So you might be interested in what your customers are saying about your particular product, but you might also be interested in what customers are saying about your competitor's similar product. All of those data are out there for the taking and for the analyzing. And so it's really, really fun to start to find some really innovative and creative ways to use the same methodology to drive very different results and very different answers. So hopefully that gave you just a couple of ideas about how we might be able to use this, but there's really a lot of them.
Excellent, good stuff. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Sprocket, and for all of your insight into data science, and so we can all get our feet a little bit wet and understand how really it's not that much of a complex, there's not a lot of there's a lot of complexity, but it is very easy to get into the game at a lower level and kind of build your way up from there. So great. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat pod, so we'll conclude today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you soon.